Take a deep breath. Now imagine that every inhalation delivered 1.5 times more energy. A constant surge of adrenaline flooding your system. You could run faster, think sharper, live on a razor's edge of poo. But consider the other side of this coin. A dragonfly the size of an eagle slices through the air above. A millipede as long as a crocodile crawls across the forest floor. A single lightning strike ignites a tree, and the entire forest, even the damp, living wood, erupts in an inferno, for the very air itself has become fuel. This was the world 300 million years ago, during the Carboniferous Period. The atmosphere contained 35% oxygen, a stark contrast to our 21% today. It was a planet born from both feverish fantasy and our most primal nightmares, a world where one simple gas rewrote the very rules of existence. This is the story of how that gas came to be, how microscopic bacteria orchestrated the planet's first ecological apocalypse, and how Earth, after learning to breathe, nearly suffocated on its own success. This is the biography of oxygen, from its birth as a lethal poison to its triumph in an age of giants, and to the collapse that would later erase 96% of all life from the face of the planet. Let us travel back 2.5 billion years. Forget everything you know of Earth. There is no blue sky, no green forest, no fresh air. This world is a set for an alien horror film. The sky is a hazy brownish orange, a chemical smog of methane and ammonia through which the sun bleeds as a dim, smeared disk. A single breath of this air would turn a human's lungs to charred rags. The oceans are the color of rust, a murky, greenish-brown soup saturated with dissolved iron, with temperatures in places reaching 70 degrees Celsius. This is not an ocean for swimming, but a planetary cauldron of primordial chemistry. And yet, there is life. Billions of microscopic beings thrive in this abyss. Anaerobic bacteria cover the seabed in thick, living mats, building strange, layered towers. They are content. They have no need for oxygen. But then, something new appeared. Cyanobacteria. Tiny green cells, no larger than a speck of dust, possessing a revolutionary secret. They had learned to turn sunlight into food, photosynthesis. They were miniature green factories, peacefully harnessing the sun's energy. But their process had a byproduct, a toxic, corrosive, and deadly waste product. At first, it went unnoticed. For millions of years, every molecule of this new gas was instantly absorbed, reacting with the iron in the oceans and causing it to rust. This iron oxide then settled on the seabed, layer upon silent layer. If you have ever seen an iron mine with its deep red and black stripes, you have gazed upon the fossilized breath of the world's first photosynthesizers. But the cyanobacteria were relentless. They multiplied. Billions of cells became trillions, blanketing the oceans in vast green carpets, working without pause for an eternity. Each cell exhaled a single, minuscule bubble of oxygen. But billions of cells, over millions of years, that is a force capable of changing a world. It was the quietest of revolutions, a slow-motion catastrophe that would poison the planet into a new state of being, setting the stage for a world both more magnificent and more terrible than anything that had come before. The great rust began to slow. For eons, the primeval oceans had served as a vast planetary sink, their waters rich with dissolved iron. Every molecule of oxygen produced by the nascent life within them was immediately captured, bound to iron, and sent drifting down into the sediment. But this process could not last forever. The planet's surface was running out of free iron to give. the sink was full. And so, a new element, a waste product, began its inexorable rise. It started to accumulate. 1%, then 2. Tiny bubbles, the exhalations of trillions of cyanobacteria, rose through the water column, broke the surface, and released their gaseous cargo into the atmosphere. For the overwhelming majority of life on Earth, this gas was not the breath of life. It was a pure, unadulterated poison. Imagine the very medium of your existence, the environment you have inhabited for more than 1 billion years, suddenly turning toxic. Oxygen is a ferociously aggressive element. It oxidizes everything it touches, tearing electrons away from other molecules in a relentless chemical assault. It ruptures cell membranes, shreds the delicate strands of DNA, and triggers catastrophic chain reactions within living cells. For the anaerobic bacteria that had long dominated the globe, this was a chemical weapon of planetary scale. A mass extinction could not tolerate this new gas, vanished over the course of a few million years. The oceans, once teeming with microbial life, became choked with the silent, drifting cells of the dead. Scientists call this moment the Great Oxidation Event. More starkly, it is known as the oxygen catastrophe. It was the planet's first global pollution crisis, engineered not by industry or technology, but by life itself. Even the architects of this new world, the cyanobacteria, found themselves besieged by their own toxic success. They were forced into a desperate evolutionary arms race against their own waste, developing sophisticated defenses, specialized enzymes to neutralize the poison, molecular pumps to expel it from their cells. It was a struggle for survival against the consequences of their own triumph. But in the crucible of this apocalypse, something extraordinary happened. Some organisms did not merely learn to defend against the poison, they learned to harness it. A new metabolic pathway emerged, aerobic respiration. By using oxygen to break down food, a cell could extract nearly 15 times more energy than before. It was the metabolic equivalent of discovering fire. This single innovation was a revolution that would change the destiny of the planet. It provided the energetic foundation for every complex development to come: the cell nucleus, the rise of multicellular organisms, the entire intricate path leading to you and to me. The world itself was physically transformed. The emerald green oceans, colored by dissolved iron, cleared. The sky, once a hazy, methane-tinged orange, shifted to a brilliant, piercing blue. High in the atmosphere, a protective ozone layer began to form, a celestial shield against the sun's harshest radiation. Down below, amidst the silent graveyards of the anaerobic age, a new kind of life, more complex, more energetic, more powerful, began to stir. The planet had learned to breathe, and it could not be stopped. Nearly 1 billion years passed. It is a span of time that defies human comprehension. To count each second in 1 billion years would take a human lifetime 32,000 times over. For this unimaginable duration, life evolved in the new, oxygenated oceans. The atmospheric concentration of this vital, dangerous gas rose in fits and starts, with dramatic peaks and troughs, but the overall trend was ever upward. Then, around 540 million years ago, oxygen levels crossed another critical threshold, reaching perhaps 10% of the atmosphere. The fuse was lit for an explosion of biological architecture. In a geological blink of an eye, the Cambrian explosion ignited. Complex animals erupted into existence, equipped with eyes, jaws, and limbs. Trilobites scuttled across the seafloor, while the apex predator Anomalocaris hunted with newfound ferocity. Life, energized by its new fuel, finally broke free of the oceans. First came the plants, humble mosses and lichens clinging to the bar-pitters. And then came the tree. Around 370 million years ago, the first true forests were meters into the sky. Horsetails swelled to the size of 3-story buildings. Tree ferns formed vast, dense canopies. They had invented a revolutionary material called lignin, a molecular scaffold of incredible strength that allowed them to grow ever taller in their competition for sunlight. But this innovation came with a cosmic oversight. Nothing on Earth knew how to eat it. When one of these colossal trees died, it did not rot. The fungi and bacteria of the time had not yet evolved the chemistry to break lignin down. For millions of years, a fallen tree was simply a monument. It would lie where it fell, gradually buried by sediment, its carbon locked away from the living world. The great forests of the Carboniferous Period became the planet's first great coal beds. A poison had become the breath of all complex life. A flaw in the cycle of decomposition fueled a future age. On this planet, it seems, nothing is ever truly an end. It is merely a foundation, waiting for the next chapter of life's improbable story to be built upon it. The soft parts would yield, returning to the earth. But the wood, the hard skeleton of the forests, remained untouched. A silent revolution was underway, a flaw in the grand cycle of life and death. The planet had not yet learned the secret of its own decay. And so, the bodies of dead trees began to accumulate. Layer upon silent layer, meter by relentless meter, they piled up, a ghost forest of carbon. In the vast, stagnant swamps, where water shielded the wood from the oxidizing air, giant deposits of buried sunlight began to form. Every entombed tree was a ledger entry that would not be balanced. The carbon, forged in its tissues, was now locked away in a subterranean vault. And the oxygen, the pure breath it had released over a lifetime, was now orphaned in the atmosphere, unclaimed by the process of decomposition. Millions of trees, all falling, all being buried, all sequestering their carbon and leaving behind a legacy of pure oxygen. Slowly, inexorably, the concentration began to rise. From our modern 21%, it climbed. 25%, then 28, 30, and finally, some 300 million years ago, it reached its zenith. A staggering 35%. The planet was supercharged, saturated with the very element of life. And in this hyper-oxygenated world, everything changed. Imagine standing at the edge of that ancient swamp. The heat is a physical presence, a constant 28 degrees Celsius, and the humidity, near 100%, clings to the skin. The air itself feels different, so dense with oxygen and moisture it seems almost liquid, a substance to be drunk rather than breathed. Every inhalation is a surge of pure energy, flooding the cells, sharpening the senses. You feel impossibly, unnervingly alive. Around you, the flora of the Carboniferous, burnt trunks disappearing into a perpetual hazy sky. Horsetails, now humble reeds, stand as tall as modern towers, their segmented forms punctuating the horizon. A world of ferns unfurls in every direction, a riot of primeval green. Underfoot, the damp soil is a thick carpet of decaying plants, and the air carries the scent of peat and fungus, not unpleasant, but alien, profoundly real. Then, a rustle in the ferns, a sound of something moving, something large. You freeze. Out of the verdant gloom, it emerges. Arthropleura, a giant millipede 2.5 meters in length. It weighs 50 kilograms, its body as thick as a human torso. Over 30 armored segments, each propelled by its own pair of legs, move with a slow, inexorable rhythm. Its chitinous plates gleam in the dim light. It crawls past, utterly indifferent, its purpose fixed on the rotting vegetation that is its sustenance. It is not a predator, but its sheer scale is a vision of primal dread. You exhale a breath you didn't realize you were holding as it vanishes into the undergrowth. A new sound breaks the stillness. Not a rustle, but a deep, resonant hum. Something is approaching, and it is fast. From out of the mist, a shape resolves. Meganeura, a dragonfly the size of a hawk. Its wingspan measures 75 centimeters. Vast, compound eyes, miracles of biological engineering, track every flicker of movement. Its wings do not buzz. They thrum with a powerful, almost menacing beat, their iridescent surfaces catching the faint light. This is no placid insect. It is a formidable aerial predator, the undisputed king of the Carboniferous skies, hunting other insects, snatching them from the air with powerful, serrated mandibles. Its speed is incredible, its maneuverability astonishing. You instinctively duck as it flashes past, a living missile in pursuit of unseen prey, disappearing between the colossal tree trunks. Your heart hammers against your ribs. You take another deep draft of the oxygen-rich air, trying to calm your senses. In the distance, a heavy splash draws your attention to the water's edge. You approach cautiously, peering into the dark, tannin-stained liquid. A silhouette moves beneath the surface, something immense. It is Aeogyrannus, a giant amphibian 4.5 meters long, with the powerful form of an alligator. It glides through its aquatic domain, the apex predator of this swampy ecosystem, hunting the large fish that thrive here. You take a reflexive step back from the bank. This world is ruled by giants, on the land, in the air, and in the water. And then, the sky flashes white. A bolt of lightning, born from the thick, volatile atmosphere, strikes a tree a few hundred meters away. In our world, it might have simply scorched the bark. But here, in an atmosphere that is over 1/3 pure oxygen, the air itself is fuel. The tree does not just burn, it explodes in a furious conflagration. This was the paradox of the Carboniferous. The planetary imbalance that allowed life to achieve such titanic proportions also made the world a tinderbox. The very element that supercharged its creatures held the seed of their destruction. It was a world holding its breath, a temporary, unstable paradise born from a pause in the planet's great cycle, waiting for the inevitable spark. In an atmosphere saturated with 35% oxygen, a forest does not simply burn, it detonates. A flash of lightning, and the world is transformed into a roaring chemical reaction. Fire does not spread, it erupts, consuming everything with an almost sentient hunger. Even the damp, living wood of the swamp bursts into flame as if it were dry paper, the moisture boiling away in an instant. The inferno leaps across vast chasms, a torrent of superheated gas moving from one colossal tree fern to the next. The rains that fall are no defense. They turn to steam long before they can touch the blaze, hissing impotently against a wall of heat too intense to overcome. The primeval forest is a crucible. In the searing chaos, life flees. The scuttling armor of Arthropleura, a millipede the length of a small car, clatters against the forest floor as it retreats from the advancing heat. A shimmering cloud of Meganeura dragonflies, each with the wingspan of a hawk, rises into the smoky sky, their iridescent wings beating against air thick with ash. The temperature becomes an unbearable physical pressure. An ancient amphibian, its primitive lungs gasping, feels the super-oxygenated air granted a final, desperate burst of strength, a speed it has never known. This is the Carboniferous Period, a world of magnificent excess, a planet living perpetually on the edge of catastrophe. The giants of this era pose a fundamental question. Why did they grow so immense? The answer lies not in their bones or muscles, but in the very air they breathed. For an insect, respiration is a delicate and limiting act. They possess no lungs, no efficient pumping mechanism to draw air deep into their bodies. Instead, their anatomy is a marvel of passive engineering, a network of microscopic tubes called tracheae that permeate every fiber of their being. Oxygen enters through small openings, spiracles, and diffuses slowly, molecule by molecule, down these ever-branching corridors to reach the tissues directly. The problem is one of physics. Diffusion is agonizingly slow and brutally inefficient over distance. The longer the tube, the less oxygen will ever reach its end. In our modern world, with its 21% oxygen, this is a fatal constraint. It places an absolute, invisible ceiling on size. A dragonfly cannot grow much larger than the palm of a hand, or its powerful flight muscles would be starved of fuel, sputtering into oxygen debt within moments. But 300 million years ago, the rules were rewritten. In an atmosphere supercharged to 35%, the gradient of diffusion was steeper, more powerful. Oxygen could be driven deeper, faster, and more effectively into the body. Tracheal tubes could be longer, more complex. This single atmospheric fact unlocked the shackles of size. The body plan could expand, becoming larger, more powerful. The hawk-sized Meganeura had all the oxygen it needed to power its enormous flight muscles, to hunt, to dominate the Carboniferous skies. In our air, it would simply suffocate, a magnificent engine with no fuel. The same principle applied to the titan of the forest floor, Arthropleura. To move a body 2.5 meters long requires a colossal amount of energy, a constant supply of oxygen to the hundreds of legs that carried it. 35% made it possible. This oxygen-rich environment was only one part of the equation. The second was opportunity. The skies were an open frontier, a vast and unclaimed territory. There were no large flying predators to challenge the insect titans. The great dynasty of the pterosaurs was still 70 million years in the future. Birds, an almost unimaginable 150 million years away. The amphibians, too, swelled to monstrous prolongs, inefficient by later standards, made viable by the sheer richness of the air. And the climate was a perfect incubator. The world was a global hothouse, warm, wet, and without polar ice caps for much of its duration. Enormous swamplands that stretched for thousands of kilometers, a world of perpetual twilight beneath a canopy of giant club mosses and tree fern. Yet this paradise had a dark, paradoxical secret. The very element that fueled its gigantism, the oxygen, was also its curse. At such high concentrations, the threshold for combustion plummets. Everything becomes fuel. Lightning strikes, a common feature of this tropical world, would have triggered firestorms that raged not for days or weeks, but for months, incinerating millions of hectares in a single event. We see the scars of this fiery age written into the rock itself. Locked within the strata of the Carboniferous Period, geologists find a recurring, ominous signature across the globe. Thick, black seams of fossilized charcoal, the petrified ghosts of these ancient infernos. It was a world of extremes, where life flourished on a razor's edge between explosive growth and fiery annihilation. But nothing is eternal. For millions of years, the cycle continued. Trees grew, died, and fell into the swamp. But their woody tissues, rich in a tough polymer called lignin, could not be broken down. No organism had yet evolved the chemical keys to unlock it. The dead simply accumulated, layer upon layer, their carbon locked away, destined to become the great coal seams that give the period its name. Then, in the deep, damp rot of the forest floor, a quiet revolution was beginning. Evolution, the relentless tinkerer, produced a solution. A new kingdom was rising, the white rot fungi. They had developed a potent cocktail of enzymes, a biological weapon capable of shattering the resilient bonds of lignin. For the first time, wood could truly decay. The age of fire and giants was consumed not by a cataclysm from the heavens, but by the patient, enzymatic work of the smallest of things. The dead forests began to decompose, releasing their carbon back into the air, slowly dialing down the planet's oxygen thermostat. The world that had forged titans was unmaking itself from the ground up, a reminder that on a living planet, every ending is merely the clearing of the stage for the next act. For them, it was a revolution. An enormous, untapped source of sustenance had finally been unlocked. But for the planet, it signaled the end of an epoch. For eons, the forests of the Carboniferous Period had been a one-way street for carbon. Trees grew, died, and fell, but the chemistry to unlock their woody essence, the rigid polymer called lignin, had not yet fully evolved. They were simply buried, layer upon layer, their stored carbon locked away from the atmosphere. Now, that had changed. Fungi and bacteria had cracked the code. The dead forests began to decay. The great carbon burial machine ground to a halt. The element of life was no longer being sequestered in the deep earth. It was being released, exhaled back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. The delicate equilibrium that had defined an era began to unravel. Photosynthesis continued its tireless work, splitting water and releasing oxygen, but the planet's primary mechanism for storing carbon had been compromised. The consequences were not immediate, but they were inexorable. The great oxygen peak began its long, slow decline. 35%, an atmosphere so rich it supercharged life, became 30. Then, over millions of years, 28. It was a slow, planetary-scale suffocation, almost too gradual to notice. Simultaneously, the very ground beneath the forests was in motion. Continents drifted and collided, grinding together to forge the vast, arid supercontinent of Pangaea. This colossal reordering of the world's landmasses disrupted ancient ocean currents and warped global weather patterns. The immense tropical swamps, the very cradle of the coal forests, began to dry out. Fewer swamps meant fewer trees. Fewer trees meant less oxygen. By the close of the Permian period, some 252 million years ago, atmospheric oxygen had plummeted to just 15%, a level significantly lower than our world today. To breathe this air would be to live permanently at an altitude of 4,500 meters. Every movement would be an effort. Every breath would deliver less energy, a constant draining strain on the machinery of life. The world was primed for a catastrophe. And then, it began. Geology knows it as the Permian-Triassic extinction event. History knows it as the Great Dying. It remains the most devastating mass extinction the Earth has ever endured. An almost unimaginable 96% of all marine species vanished. 70% of terrestrial vertebrates were wiped from existence. It is the only mass extinction known to have significantly impacted the planet's insects. The causes were a complex cascade of horrors. In what is now Siberia, colossal volcanic eruptions tore the crust asunder, spewing unfathomable quantities of carbon dioxide and ash into the atmosphere. The oceans acidified. The climate collapsed into violent extremes. But the precipitous fall in oxygen was the critical, underlying stressor that had pushed the biosphere to the brink. In this thin, gasping air, the giants were the first to fall. The reign of Meganeura, the hawk-sized dragonflies, was over. Their immense bodies, dependent on passive diffusion for respiration, could no longer draw enough oxygen from the impoverished air. The colossal millipede Arthropleura, a titan of the forest floor, vanished. The giant amphibians, rulers of the swamps, perished. Survival became a game of efficiency. The future belonged to the small, the resourceful, those who could do more with less. And among them, moving through the wreckage of this fallen world, were small, agile reptiles with a biological secret weapon. A respiratory system of breathtaking efficiency, a blueprint for the lungs of birds. A one-way system of air sacs pushed atmosphere through their lungs twice, extracting the maximum possible amount of oxygen from every single breath. They survived the apocalypse, and in its wake, they inherited a planet. The age of giant insects was over, forever. Never again would dragonflies patrol the skies on wings a meter wide. The laws of physics and the current level of oxygen in our atmosphere simply will not allow it. But the story was far from over. Those small, efficient survivors, the dinosaurs, would leverage their incredible respiratory system to dominate the world for the next 165 million years, achieving sizes that dwarfed the giants of the age before. The Diplodocus, the Brachiosaurus, the Tyrannosaurus, all were descendants of those small creatures who learned to breathe when the world itself was suffocating. And us? We exist in a world of 21% oxygen, a fragile balance maintained by life, for life. Every breath you take is a legacy of billions of years of evolution, of countless organisms that lived, died, produced oxygen, and buried carbon. That balance, however, is not static. Scientists have measured that our atmospheric oxygen is, once again, very slowly falling. When we burn fossil fuels, when we resurrect that very same carbon buried during the Carboniferous Period, we consume oxygen to create carbon dioxide, reversing a process 300 million years in the making. We are, in a very real sense, breathing the ghosts of a long-dead world and unmaking the very air that forged it. The great atmospheric engine begins to run in reverse. There is no sudden panic, no precipitous fall. The decline is a whisper, a slow unraveling measured over millennia. Our world today faces no imminent shortage of oxygen. The true peril lies elsewhere, in the relentless rise of carbon dioxide, a gas that is rapidly rewriting our climate. But the lesson of that ancient past is clear. The balance is exquisitely fragile. The alteration of a single gas in the atmospheric equation can rewrite the very code of life, forging giants in one epoch only to condemn them to oblivion in the next. Life, in its profound resilience, finds a way. It adapts to almost any condition the planet can conceive. When oxygen is plentiful, it scales to breathtaking proportions. When the atmosphere thins, it retreats, becoming smaller, leaner, a master of efficiency. Nothing is forever. The world of the Carboniferous Period, with its colossal arthropods and sprawling swamp forests, seemed an eternal empire. Yet its downfall came not from an asteroid, but from a quiet, evolutionary innovation. A humble fungus, developing the novel ability to decompose wood, changed everything. Perhaps, millions of years from now, a new era of high oxygen will dawn, giving rise to new titans we cannot even begin to imagine. For life continues. Evolution never truly stops. The story of oxygen will continue to be written across the face of our planet, chapter by incredible chapter, a testament to the endless cycle of creation and dissolution.